So with that, we're going to transition into introducing our opening keynote speakers this morning. We are super excited to bring to you the authors of a book called Power On. And that's actually going to be one of the prizes that we, give away. We have plenty of books to give away today and tomorrow. So this is a phenomenal book. It is a graphic novel. You're going to hear more about it, but it is inspirational because it is really based on actual student voices. That was one of the goals of this book. And I love the way that they describe the book as, following or capturing student voices that found themselves learning computer science in an empowering way, or they found that computing was empowering to them, both personally and politically. And the emphasis on how all kids, regardless of zip code, race, or gender, or background, or identity, all kids really need to have access to computer science education. And so I want to introduce to you our guest speakers, Ryoo and Jane Margolis. And so I'm going to bring them up on the stage, and we will do that introduction. Oh, I am going to bring up Jean.
Hello.
And Jane. Hi. Good morning, Jean and Jane. Welcome to our summit.
Morning.
Thank you for being here.
It's so exciting to be here with everybody. Hi.
Hi.
Virtual hugs, everyone.
Absolutely. Again, we're so grateful that you're here. I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'll pull up your presentation too. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you for the beautiful introduction and start to the morning. We know it's very early for some, and actually very early for all of us. Summer break, should we get to sleep in? But I hope that you're enjoying the day, have a good cup of coffee or tea next to you, and we are so thrilled to be here with you. My name is Ryoo, and I am the lead author of this graphic novel, Power On, also Director of Research of the Computer Science Equity Project based at UCLA. Passing it on to Jane to introduce herself.
I'm Jane Margolis. I've worked with Jean we've collaborated for many years. And I'm a researcher. I've been researching equity issues in computer science for about 25 years. And wrote the book Stuck in the Shallow End, Unlocking the Clubhouse, Women in Computing, and now with Jean, Power On. So really delighted to be here.
And we're here presenting with two of our wonderful collaborators who are Computer Science Teachers Association Equity Fellows, Shaina Glass and Lilibeth Mora. Shaina, do you want to give a brief intro?
Good morning. I'm Shaina Glass, and currently I'm a professional learning manager at CSTA, the Computer Science Teachers Association, and honored that last year I was also a CSTA Equity Fellow. So I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas today, and I'm super excited to be here and join you all.
So my name is Lily Mora. I'm also a professional learning manager at CSTA, and I'm one of Shaina's twins because we were both also CSTA Equity Fellows, and we're really excited. I'm tuning in from Vallejo, California, which is in Northern California. Thanks for having us.
And we're super excited to have Shaina and Lily with us. Thank you so much for making the time, ladies. You'll hear more from them at the second half of our presentation. And as they have been key collaborators with several other folks to create Educator Resources for this graphic novel. But what is this graphic novel? Some of you may have seen it already, but we kind of feel like, images can speak louder than words sometimes. So let's start with a little trailer of this a new book.
Hi, my name's Taylor, and this is a graphic novel about me and my friends as we learned about the good and the bad of tech. What do I mean by that? Well, during the summer before high school, we found out that the technology we use every day and surrounds us wherever we live isn't always designed with our best interests in mind. Not only that, but the people who are at the tech design table, computer scientists who decide what tech we use and how we use it, don't always represent who we are and what we care about. Well, my friends and I decided that we wanted to change that. This story describes how Christine, Antonio, and John and I tried to learn about computer science so we could one day be at the design table. It describes the help and obstacles we experienced along the way and how we decided to make a difference in our community to get the education we want and deserve. And we might look like a bunch of drawn characters. Beautiful, I know. You can thank our illustrator, Karis JB, for that. But we're actually based on real people, real stories, real research. Read Power On and tell me what you think.
So that gives you a little sneak peek, and I just wanted to share that the wonderful woman who was the voice of Taylor for that video was actually somebody who studies computer science through digital tech and its relationship with society at Georgia Tech. So it's very cool for those of you who are calling in locally for this day. And so let me just pop over to this. So why did we write this graphic novel? I'll pass it to Jane.
So I'm just going to give a little bit of the backstory. I was about 2 years ago, I was contacted by MIT Press, which was the publisher of 2 earlier books I had written about inequity in computer science education. And they said, would you be interested in writing a book for youth? And at that time, and still now today, Jean and I were working on a research project interviewing students. We call it our student voice research in Los Angeles and Mississippi, doing interviews with students about their experiences in computer science education. So I went immediately to Jean and told her about the MIT suggestion. And if any of you know Jean, she enthusiastically said, yes, it's a go, let's do it. And then she added, and let's make it a graphic novel. And graphic novel, I had not read a graphic novel of late. And even though I've worked with Jean for 15 years, I did not know what an obsessive reader of graphic novels she was. So she sort of put me on a study plan. I got really into graphic novels, and off we went. And Jean is really the driving force, the creative storyteller of the whole book. It's based on all of our research. And we really wanted to put students' perspectives, their voices, and their experiences at the center of the story. So, and every step along the way, we were inspired by Robert Moses. If any of you are math teachers, you probably have heard of him. He recently passed away. He was a very prominent leader of the civil rights movement and an educator, a liberatory educator. He deeply inspired us, and these are the words that appear in the front of the novel, and we dedicate the book to him. He says, "We believe that the kind of systemic change necessary to prepare our young people for the demands of the 21st century requires young people to take the lead in changing it." And we say amen to that. And that's the kickoff of our book.
And so we want to emphasize that this book is not purely fiction, right? It's based on our conversations with youth and with educators and research practice partnerships that we have been engaged with, both in the Los Angeles Unified School District and in the Mississippi Delta and Northern Mississippi. And we, in our research, really aim to amplify student voices. And when we were given this opportunity to write for youth, to youth, we were like, well, if it's really for youth, it has to be really highlighting their voices. And specifically the voices of those who have been pushed out of the world of computing that I know all of us are here today to support. And so in our current research in collaboration with the LA Unified School District Instructional Technology Initiative, we have been focusing on learning with youth, low-income, urban, primarily Latino, Latina, Latinx youth. And in collaboration with Shelley Hollis and folks like Natasha Woods and Brittany Cohen, who are educators in Mississippi, we've been working with low-income rural Black youth in the Deep South. And these are folks who've been taking either exploring computer science, or some have even had the chance to take AP computer science principles in high school. And in collaboration with others listed on this slide, listed in alphabetical order, who either currently are or were part of our team, we really want to understand what matters most for youth's sense of engagement and identity and agency with computing. Because if we're just learning computer science, but we don't see a way for it to connect to who we are and what we care about, you know, how are we going to really stick with it and go beyond just a high school class or middle school class or elementary school exploration? So we wanted to elevate our findings from that work, as well as experiment with this medium of a graphic novel that could amplify students' voices while sparking important classroom discussions about computer science in today's world. So more specifically, youth in our research study have been telling us that they want their CS experiences to connect to the real world that they live in. They've reminded us that they do not live in a bubble, right? They have access to technology. They use media. Many use cell phones or are on social media. They're aware of what's going on in the news. And they're very concerned about issues of racism, anti-gay beliefs. They are involved with Black Lives Matter or climate change activism. And they care about what's been happening with the impacts of COVID on their communities, mental health issues, the rise of hate crimes, school shootings, and more. And so we've written Power On at this really historical moment to support the important conversations that youth are telling them they want in their learning spaces about not only how these real world issues connect to who they are and what they care about, but also how they connect to technology, the technology that computer scientists are creating, which directly impact and feed back on what we have seen come to pass in both good and bad ways. And so in the book, we share about a growing body of important research, pointing to how computer science is neither apolitical nor neutral, right? While there are still many computer scientists who think that they're not responsible for the impacts of their creations, they just make the tech and it's somebody else's job to figure out whether that's good or not. The research in these books and films are describing how computer scientists' personal biases and belief systems are actually getting built into the technologies we use every day. And this has huge negative impacts, primarily on low-income communities, people of color, people with disabilities, women, LGBTQ+ community, and many others, many of us who are underrepresented in the field of computing.
So despite the world that our students are inhabiting and teachers are inhabiting right now, there was a survey by CSTA and the Kapoor Center who showed that 39% of teachers do not see the importance of covering computing's roles in perpetuating biases relating to racism, sexism, and other inequities in the classroom. So that's 39%. And 59% of white teachers, compared to 67% Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Pacific Island teachers, are confident utilizing material highlighting race, ethnicity, and culture. So just 59% are confident. So there was 40% that were not, and 60% who felt a resistance to covering issues of racism and sexism. So again, to emphasize, we wrote the book for students and for teachers to help facilitate these really, really important discussions in the classroom and to give everybody support. So we also, in our supporting the Kapoor Center framework for culturally responsible and sustaining CS education. And there are 6 components of their framework that appear and sort of drive forth the storyline in Power On. We acknowledge racism in CS and enacting anti-racist practices, creating inclusive and equitable classroom cultures. Pedagogy and curriculum need to be rigorous, relevant, and encourage socio-political critiques. Student voice, agency, and self-determination are prioritized in CS classrooms. Family and community culture assets should be incorporated into CS learning, and diverse professionals and role models need to be provided to show an exposure to a range of CS and tech careers. And all of these components of the framework are part of our purpose in writing Power On.
So as noted earlier, youth voices are really what drives this work. So we want to hear from youth directly. While the youth that we work with are unable to be here today, we did record some interviews with them in advance. And so here we're going to hear from Natalia, who's a student that I had the privilege of meeting back in her junior year in 2018-19, when she took AP Computer Science Principles after having had no positive experiences with computing before. Her one Intro to Computer Science class in early high school was literally learning about the parts of a computer for purchasing them. And then that was it for the entire year. And so she really took like a risk taking a computer science class after thinking that computer science was not going to be so exciting. And she found that it was really engaging and she loved it. And she became one of our student advisors who gave feedback on multiple drafts of Power On. And here she's going to talk about why it is so important to contextualize computer science learning and the topics covered in this book. Please play the video. Thanks.
In terms of like actually convincing people who think that computer science is this disconnected topic, like away from reality, is that it really isn't. It affects a lot of the way we live. We use it all the time. And I think also hammering down the points of the way it does affect people, whether it's like algorithm bias or how it connects to politics or how it can bring communities together, or how it can bring resources to places that might not have good access to them. Or even things like the digital divide with some people not having good internet access and how that can really hinder some communities and people out there. I think just really focusing on the point that it's not this disconnected thing that you have to learn in a classroom, you know, in a vacuum or something, that it's always intermingling with us. It's affecting the way we live for the most part. And it's just,
The video froze on my end, but I think this is the key point, what she says in the video, which is you can't really treat computer science like it's in a vacuum, right? And so, you know, well, how does that come to life and get translated into, oh, I'll just move on to, how does this get translated in the graphic novel, right? So, we wanted to share examples that we actually experienced in our research with educators and youth. And one of the computer science teachers in the story, this happened also in real life, who represents the strong and caring educators that we've had the privilege of working with in our research. She really engages her students in a conversation about biased algorithms that have been used in medicine, and that doctors and nurses did not even realize were prioritizing the life-saving services for white patients over equally sick Black patients, and how that resulted in unnecessary deaths of Black people. And the teacher shares about this reality as a way to emphasize another key value that we believe needs to be discussed in computer science classrooms, which is that everyone needs to learn and understand computer science, regardless of their interest and career pathways, because technology is affecting everything that we do in our lives. And if we're not aware of how it works, how can we be prepared to critically assess their impacts and avoid these kinds of problems? And she has this discussion after bringing her youth on a field trip to a game design company that is primarily made up of white and certain Asian men, who do not reflect the diversity of her students and their community. And so the youth are really grappling with these questions and thinking about the impacts of underrepresentation on computing, as well as ethics in computing. We also explore, this idea that computer science should not be taught in a vacuum because of the ways that tech affects us so deeply and to this very day, right? So how this comes to life in chapter 1, which is really where the main characters get interested in understanding, well, what is computer science and why is that people are using tech that doesn't work, right? What happens is that the friends find out about a police shooting of an innocent Black man who was targeted using racist AI. And this is a really tragic thing, and they of course become angry and upset, and especially very protective of their friend Taylor, who identifies as Black. And that frustration pushes them to ask important questions. Why are police using a tool that hurts instead of helps people? Who is making this kind of technology? How can AI technology, this thing that comes in plastic and metal, how can that be something that's racist if it isn't human? And so they find out that there's actually a lot of research and news articles out there about this issue of biased AI, as well as problematic algorithms in computing. And that's how they begin to reflect on what is their role when they know about this? What is their role in affecting change? And so.
And as Jean said, we wanted the readers to be guided to other research that was talking about the biases in AI and all of the ethical questions that were involved in computer science. And so to ensure we lead them to these other sources and original research. And so we feature key people who have been doing this work, including Sophia Noble, Virginia Eubanks, Kathy O'Neill, and Ruha Benjamin. And our goal, again, has been to provide reliable and easy entree into engaging with these ideas and information to support students, educators, parents, community members to ask critical questions about computing today. And we also present the work of people who we call CS heroes. They're computer scientists from traditionally marginalized groups who have been pioneers in the most socially responsible work that is being done, challenging AI bias, working to increase representation of students of color, females, students with disabilities, LGBTQ students. And so we, again, lead the readers to investigate these CS heroes.
But we know that teachers are key to this big cultural shift that is needed in computing and computer science education. And so we're going to be hearing from our educator collaborators, but before we return to them, we wanted to hear from one more student. We wanted to share Axel's voice. Axel is another computer science student who I met in Los Angeles Unified and who gave input on the graphic novel. And here he reminds us about what teachers can do to best engage learners with computing. Lynn, can you cue up the video, please? Thank you.
So I think that more marginalized folks need to be represented in the world of technology and computer science, because I mean we know just how much technology and like just how much we use technology in our like daily lives, and technology isn't used by, and not only affects rich white cis folks, like it affects everyone, and a lot of people that it affects negatively is more often folks that are marginalized. In all like courses, I think that we should be more open and honest about the way that like race, class, and a lot of our identity affects the subject that we're learning, because it's definitely there. And like I think it's hard to like learn, it's hard to effectively learn computer science unless you're, and I think it also makes it harder if you're not connecting relevant issues to the like topic that you're teaching. That like, it makes it harder for students to relate to it and like be to give their attention to it. Don't go into like a computer science class as a teacher only wanting to teach computer, like just strictly computer science, because then it doesn't necessarily do any like justice to the students who are learning that, especially to the ones who are not necessarily already interested in computer science, because there's a slim chance that they might suddenly be inspired to be computer scientists or to want to be engaged with that. But for those who aren't already doing that, it's good to get them drawn into it by having them think about outside issues, quote unquote. And it's also good to like get the students who are already interested in computer science to get started to think about these issues, because those are issues that they're going to have to deal with and like run into when they are working on their things outside of class.
So sorry for the technical issues, but that was pretty much the end of the video anyway, outside of class and going into post-high school. And so let me just moving the slides forward. My computer, oops. Okay, there we go. Yay, technology. Now building on what Natalia and Axel have shared, we've been thinking really deeply about how can we support our community of educators in leading these discussions about issues in a computer science context where, traditionally we've been told we should just teach programming, right? We should teach problem solving, but we haven't necessarily been told how to connect that to the real issues that Axel is saying we should be connecting to, right? And so towards these ends, we've collaborated with a wonderful group of Computer Science Teachers Association Equity Fellows who have worked tirelessly to create a facilitator resource guide, which is going to be available for free online in the next coming months. Right now, we're in the process of having those resources read and getting feedback from critical friends in the larger CS for All community. And our amazing collaborators include in alphabetical order by last name: Megan Bowen, Sarah Siras, Shantae Kostin, Shaina Glass, Lilibeth Mora, and Elizabeth Name. And their wealth of knowledge from being, not only computer science educators who have been learning computer science and teaching it, but also as women and women of color, which that was also totally by chance. It's not like we were only seeking out women and women of color, but I think it's been really wonderful having their input. They're all people who work with low-income communities and with youth of color across the nation. And so having that perspective from all of these different contexts has been so valuable to the creation of the Educator Resources, which we hope will be useful for you all. And we have four of them will be talking about the Educator Resources during a workshop tomorrow, which you'll hear a little bit more about later today. And today we're super excited to have two of our educators here, Shaina and Lily, and we'll be hearing a little bit about their experiences, and I'll turn it over to Jane to ask them some questions to respond to.
Okay, so first of all, I want to begin with incredible gratitude to these teachers, to the two individuals on the screen. We are so grateful for the work they have poured into basically taking the graphic novel and creating these resources and questions for students and activities and everything that accompany the book. So first, we're going to run this like a little panel. So Shaina and Lily, if you could first give a 2-sentence, it can be a bit more, introduction about who you are, what you teach, do in education, and where you work. And then, why did you want to get involved in the graphic novel effort? And you want to start with Lily and then Shaina?
Sure. So because we did our like brief intros, more about what I do specifically. I'm a professional learning manager, just like Shaina, but we have different projects that we oversee. I specifically support the CS Ed Week Teacher Resources, our professional learning series, which is our PD that we offer year round, the alumni for CSTA Equity Fellows, and then I also, with our ACE Grant Consortium, I'm creating the Identity Inclusion course and supporting the chapter inquiry groups. But something else is that I'm also a chapter leader for a local CSTA chapter, which we're hoping that folks in this space are considering becoming a CSTA member and then linking with colleagues in your region to really support you in the work of educating students in CS. But why I wanted to get involved in this effort was specifically because this is the first of its kind, a graphic novel related towards CS equity. And also when I learned about it, I'm like, okay, how would I implement this as an educator? And so combining my passions of advocacy for CS equity and building resources that support teachers in that, I thought this was an amazing opportunity to collaborate with a great crew of folks. And Jane, they don't know that I'm their fan club president. So that's the other reason.
Nice to hear. Okay, thank you, Lily. And Shaina.
Good morning, everyone. So again, I was introduced earlier. I am also a professional learning manager. Some of the roles and responsibilities I currently oversee at CSTA is that I'm actually the lead on CS Equity Fellows, the current fellowship. I also support CS for ELs, which is a professional development program for teachers of EL students. And I lead the work on a teacher-led policy committee, where we are trying to implement more and support more teacher voice and what's happening in computer science. As many of you know, in Georgia, I'm also in Texas, we have similar struggles. Let me put it that way. And it's important that teachers also be at the table to hold those conversations. I also support CSTA's teacher and student standards and some other stuff. But just in a nutshell, everything's about supporting teachers. And I enjoy the challenge and it excites me, new adventures that I face. Why did I want to get involved? As I just mentioned, those challenging situations facing teachers, this book can help. It's not just for students, it also teaches teachers how to address those struggles. We were calling them like spicy topics maybe, but difficult conversations, helping students to navigate and understand identity, whether it be color, their sexuality, individuality, whatever it may be, those things that teachers may not really know what to do or how to do it. This book, it kind of builds that guide of support, while also supporting students where they can find their voice if they don't know that they have one. So I really wanted to be a part of that for that. And I am also a part of that fan club. When it came up, I could not miss the opportunity to support support these two women. So
thank you both. So next slide. So you've touched on this, but hopefully you can go ahead. So and go deeper with these questions. So, what are your hopes for your for the book? What do you see the challenges in implementing it in the classroom, and what are your hopes about what the graphic novel will bring into the classroom? Lily, you
Sure.
want to go first? Okay.
Oh yeah, no problem. So what are my hopes about this? I believe that because this is geared to students, that this can be a launching pad of sparking interest of topics related to inequities in CS, and then how it directly impacts them individually and then their peers. Uh, because of this launching pad, it really can start that conversation so they can begin to just have dialogue about it. And then also because of the direction where the graphic novel goes, that it encourages them to take action. So to be advocates for injustice in CS. And then I'm hoping too that students would be encouraged to be practitioners, and whether they are decoding all this like historical nonsense, or and then recoding, so that the products of CS benefit everyone in society, especially those who've been marginalized and harmed by it.
Thank you. And Shaina?
Something I'm hoping far more than what it brings to a CS class is that more students will go into the CS classroom. The benefit of this book is that it targets and discusses how you can utilize CS to solve some of the problems that we face, but it also shows those beyond the CS classroom why they should become a part of this movement, why you should go and take and learn different languages, programming languages, why your voice can be amplified regardless of the way that you address the world. Meaning, if you struggle with your physical voice, you can use your programming voice to actually have a grander impact. Both are wonderful, but it's important that you know both. Just like you know how to read and you know how to write and you know how to count, you should know how to program. And everyone should have that ability. Some of the challenges that I see in implementing this book is getting access to this book. Unfortunately, I do realize access is an issue for computer science in general, but depending on where you live, this may be a struggle. So also getting teachers involved to be and utilize their voice. I'm speaking to the audience to don't hesitate to use your voice to advocate for what students need. And this book is what students need.
Jane, can I add to that?
Yeah.
So now that when teachers receive the book, when they are able and students are able to access it, a big challenge is how do you effectively implement this type of novel with your students? Because the topics that are addressed are not light. And so it's really important that teachers are self-reflective about their identity, bias in technology, and even their own implicit biases. And I'm really hoping too, now that we can tie it back to hopes, is that teachers would process this with colleagues prior to implementation. That they would collaborate with others so that they can help identify and implement strategies that would promote inclusivity and student agency.
Wonderful. And God, could go on forever with both of you. You're doing a workshop tomorrow, right? That's going to go more deeper into all of these questions and talk more about the resources that you've been creating, which is wonderful. And I just wanted to riff off one other point, which is the book is not just, it is for computer science community and teachers and classrooms. That's what we wrote it for. But we also see that it is could be so useful in civics, in ethnic studies, in English, and science classes, that this is the book is raising the issues about our tech-saturated world, and all students are living through it. So in terms of it also being a recruiting tool for more students to be taking computer science who care about the world that they live in, we're hoping that that will happen true. And you both referred to that. So thank you. And just thank you for your work, everything. So who is speaking on this slide?
I can take over.
Okay.
So I think we're now going to jump into a brief overview of the educator resources that Shaina and Lily will lead us through. And Shaina and Lily will let me know when you want me to advance slides. Thanks.
Go for it, Jean. So what we have for you all today on the next slide, we have, because we had talked about that challenge of like, how do you implement this? And it's important that folks who do, after reading the book, consider walking through our foundational equity guide, which allows for authentic self-reflection, and then provides strategies to foster safe spaces for learning and discussion, because there's some like really heavy topics in here. And then also just general building self-confidence in implementing material like this. We also have chapter guides for the 7 chapters of this novel, which provides standards alignment. We have some comprehension questions and discussion questions, and then student activities and resources to help you extend what's being covered in the book, so that you can actually implement it in your curriculum. In the next slide are some of the examples of the reflection questions. Like, for example, what are examples of algorithms that you use in everyday life? Because we are all consumers and users of technology. Do you think robots can be racist? What's the number or percentage of students that are taking CS in your state? So this allows for, and we also provide you links to how do you get that information. And then, you know, whether you're at the beginning or at the end of this novel, what character do you most identify? We are hoping that students find relevance in the characters and then begin to see the connections of who they are and how it relates to how CS is being rolled out in different regions. And the next slide will be covered by Shaina.
Thank you, Lily. Tag. Okay, so some of the topics that we are addressing will be, of course, identity. Who does CS? As Jane mentioned earlier, it'll feature the CS heroes and how you can dig into the work that they do, and how this can apply to what students can do. Back to articles back to different chapters in the book. One of the examples is the pre-work of the Anatomy of an Ally from the Learning from Justice, which was formerly Teaching Tolerance, the Teaching Tolerance website. We pulled a lot of resources and did a lot of research on work that was already being done, but how it can apply to your computer science classroom. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Some of my favorites, and this is kind of like a mini collab with Lily on Good Trouble. We did some digging into John Lewis and what it means, what good trouble means, and student agency and advocacy. So this goes back to tying to what Lily just mentioned about where you can find your state data and how students can start to do that research. Not to give away too much in the book, but they start to dig into their local data and understanding how you can use data for advocacy. Why is it so important? So the Voices of Youth and UNICEF, they created resources that helps us to further understand and help students understand how various examples of how they can utilize that. And of course, that ties directly into your CS classroom where you're pulling that data and building that in their programs. And then also understanding how to use advocacy for change, which is coming from the Learning to Give Foundation. So great resources, amazing activities, and it will help in each of the components. I can keep going, and then I'll pass it back over.
Actually, can I add to the good trouble? Is that okay, Shaina?
Yeah.
If you go back to that last slide, so some of our extension activities are not just some are just regarding the topic. Like good trouble is a large topic that any content area can cover, but then there's like the data related to CS equity. But then even there's activities like there's a good trouble activity for Minecraft that students can implement, like can play around with. So I mean, there's a ton of resources for you all to explore beyond the novel that can help really make the learning relevant to how they're learning CS. So we're hoping that you all benefit from these resources. And I think the next slides we're going to be covering tomorrow so that you can learn a deeper dive of what we're offering in our resources.
Absolutely.
All right. So here's a just if you want to learn more about the book, if you don't win it today at the summit, feel free to join our newsletter. And we also are on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. And we'd also love to hear from you. And I wanted to turn it to Jane before I close out.
Yes, just two additional slides just to make a bang of what we're really emphasizing here is student agency. We hope that the book will help start discussions and give tools to teachers and students, basically to change an unequal system. And the students in the youth in the novel get so into the importance of computer science, and they feel that everyone should be learning it in their district, and they decide to do something about it. And so we feel that this whole issue of student agency is really central to the book, and we hope it'll be a big part of conversations that go on around the book. And next slide. But you're not gonna, I don't know if you'll be able to read this, but I wanted to just put this slide in here. And it relates to what Shaina was saying. We don't all I live in California. Other people live in New York. We're getting LAUSD has embraced the book. So is New York City, but not everyone lives there in places that are embracing issues around equity. And I just thought that this Candorville cartoon really captured what is going on, and it's kind of the elephant in the room. So Lamont says, so white folks in our state, God, I can hardly read this. Hold on. Woo! Can someone read this okay.
I can read it for you.
Okay, I should have. Okay, thank you.
So white folks in our state passed a law that essentially forbids teaching the history of racism if it makes white kids feel ashamed. And it gives parents the right to sue teachers who violate that law. That's why someone is suing me. Dios mío, what did you tell the class that made a white kid feel ashamed? I told them white folks passed a law that essentially forbid teaching the history of racism if it makes white kids feel ashamed.
And I thought that this just summed up, what is happening. And we just want people to know that we're prepared. We will offer support, and but we also are getting incredible response, positive response around the country about the novel. So this is happening, and also incredible enthusiasm is going on as well.
And to talk about that enthusiasm, the good news is that we do have educators like yourselves taking on the book in their spaces, whether that's in school or out of school. Jane mentioned LA Unified and the New York City Department of Education. We have heard of administrators bringing it to their teachers. after school clubs. We've been in conversation with Girls Who Code, and they're developing a pilot program to use the book as a springboard for a sort of like semester-long kind of hackathon. And even Melinda French Gates tweeted that we should all make sure to share Power On with a young person in our lives. So in closing, we really want to say thank you. All of you are doing important work. And we know that, and I know this was brought up in the comments, and we're going to have some time for a Q&A to discuss exactly this, that like many of you are working in contexts where you can't talk about race, that your job is on the line. So how can you use this book in your space in that when your work is being threatened? So I think it'll be great to talk about that next. So just wanted to, but before we do that, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you, all of you who are joining us from Atlanta, from Georgia, and then all the other many folks who have been here today, you know, Lynn and team, making this a virtual event so we could all join in. It's really an honor. So keep in touch. You can reach us here. And yeah, so I guess we can open it up
and power
to questions.
On. So thank you all. Thank you all so much for everything you do.
All right, well, that was really amazing. Thank you for your presentation. I was trying to curate just a couple of questions from the audience, and you know, encouraging them to also post them in the chat as well too. And I keep doing that by accident, I apologize. So one of the first questions that came through the chat is a question in reference to the critical race theory debates that are occurring in multiple states. And, you know, just wondering how, you know, can we teach using this book in the midst of those debates. And there are, you know, parental concerns as well too to consider when the, you know, parents' voices have been fairly strong in not wanting their kids to participate in these types of discussions. So any advice or suggestions or, you know, approaches to being able to address, you know, that challenge would be great.
I can start us off, but I think we'll lean heavily on Lily and Shaina from their direct teaching experiences as well. But and obviously Jane has a lot of wisdom to share. But I'm just thinking about, first of all, we never mentioned CRT in the book or the resources. So in that sense, you are safe. But then, you know, when people start saying, oh, you know, this is about race, we can't talk about race in the classroom. I think for sure that's challenging because we directly are talking about race in this book, but I think there might be ways to also reframe and say what we're really talking about is computer science. We're talking about technology. We're talking about the current world, and your children, our children, are every day engaging with technology, with these tools, with computer science. So that's what we're really talking about here. And guess what? Race happens to come into that. Gender happens to come into that. Everything happens to come into that because tech touches everything. So there's not a way to talk about technology without also talking about identity and who we are, because who we are affects not only how the tools are created, but how we use them. So that could be like maybe one way to get into that conversation and kind of de-escalate the fear or the worry about, is this about race? Is this book only about race? And I don't know if others wanted to add to that or edit me, right? Maybe my suggestion's not the best, but.
That is how I would answer it, Jane, exactly at this point. You know, that's just how I would answer it. You know, we're in a hard time, and I feel like we're in a really hard time, and we may get pushback, but I feel we've put the book out there, and we're going to have to see what happens, and we're going to have to hope that that there's going to be more places that are going to adopt it and find benefit and strength in it than places that are going to shut it down. And that's how social movements happen anyway. There's always opposition, there is always pushback, and we have to keep going and building on the places that are able to keep going, and totally support. I mean, teachers whose jobs they feel their jobs are on the line, totally get that. And so strategies for using the book may differ from place to place, but we just hope, as in all social movements, that the pushback will be stronger and more wide than the shutdown. And we're just going to have to make it day by day.
I just wanted to add this point. States do develop laws that are, let's say, they are developing laws or have developed laws to make it more difficult on teachers. A benefit of this book is it doesn't have to come from you. What this book is going to do is going to push the students to question. Let their voice be the lead, and it will amplify because there's more of them than there are of you. Let them be the one to initiate the change and to push legislators. Everybody wants to take a picture with a child. Everybody wants to take a picture with a student. Let that student lead the questions. They're going to push their teachers out of their comfort zone with the questions, and they'll push leaders out of their comfort zone with questions. And hopefully that will start to make that change. We just have to get to their hands so they can read this. So that then they can start to formulate their own ideas. Because it's coming from students. It's coming from a student's perspective, and that will help them. And it will help us ultimately.
And something else that Shaina did really well in the development of the resources is she aligned every chapter to the actual computer science student standards. So that's something that we're hoping would blend itself in the process, is that no, we are covering CS standards in this novel. But right, like Shaina said, if you let the students take the lead, we would love for this to go viral, not just because of what's happening in the classrooms, but specifically directly with youth and their avenues of social media, that they are the ones pushing it, that they become the advocates for this. But even at that point, when they're able to have those conversations, we hope that they utilize those strategies that help promote safe conversation, so that those who are at the table, who are making those decisions, can really get a more accurate picture about the whole purpose for this novel.
Yeah, I really like that, Lily, because there is another question, and this was I guess, more specific to what, Jean, you were presenting on with the student that was talking about their discovery on there is bias in AI. And there was a question or a comment was sent to me about, does that mean that there's prejudice in whoever was programming it or whoever created that AI? Is it correct to say that? Or, how would you facilitate a discussion like that in a safe way, if that comes up?
Thank you so much for these questions, everyone, by the way. I think they're really valuable to discuss. And regarding this specifically, I think it's actually one of the reasons why we wrote this book, right, is this culture shift of moving away from the idea that technology is completely neutral. It has, it's just separate from the real world that we live in. And I think, yes, when we're working with youth and talking about the ways that technology becomes biased, it does root back to the fact that programming is a cultural practice, right? It's not like programming is purely, I mean, we could also say math is a cultural practice. I was about to say, it's not like programming is only math. Math is also a cultural practice, right? It's the ways that we see the world and interpret the world and feed back onto that world is how programming and computer science works. And so as a result, we humans, the values that we have affect the way that we problem solve, the ways that we believe what to prioritize and what we think is important affects how we decide to design the loops in a program, or who we decide to make the program for, right? Who is our audience and why we're prioritizing that audience over maybe somebody who doesn't fit in that group, you know? So I think these are all really important questions that have to happen in every computer science classroom. And I think starting from that place of, you know, we all have value systems that we grown up in and that we believe in, and that sometimes can be turned, and that creates biases. And sometimes those are good things in the way that we live, and sometimes they're really not, and they hurt other people and hurt ourselves in the long run. So being aware of that as the base level, as for how we then understand, well, computer science is part of that world. And so computer scientists are coming to their work with their own views and visions, and that shapes the technology they create.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, which is an example of the first voice recognition systems, like voicemail, could not hear women's voices. Now, it wasn't that basically that the programmers were biased against women, but the programmers, who were mostly male, the data that they were putting in, you know, the prototypes of voices that they were putting into the machine to be able to pick up voices were all male voices. They were just putting in male voices to teach the machine to hear. And so they're blind spots. So voicemail could not hear women's voices. Likewise, Google Pixel, the phones, you know, cannot read Black faces and cannot read especially Black women's faces, because the data that is put in by the programmers does not include a whole range of skin tones. And so there's blind spots when you have a workforce that is creating these machines and machine learning that is not representative of everyone. One of the biggest messages of Power On, the book, is that underrepresentation of Black and brown people and women matters. It really matters. It matters in the machines that are being created, in the innovations that are being created. And so I think that there are so many examples that are kind of mind-blowing for students and educational, about how these robots are being created in machine learning, and even our cameras and everything, and why underrepresentation really matters in this new tech-saturated world. This is something everyone has to understand.
And we also hope that those who are interested in more would attend our workshop tomorrow. But there's ways that you could actually facilitate this learning with students. For example, in Scratch and in Snap, There are input-output programs where, for example, you could have a machine learn if I put a word, is it good or bad? And you can have students build that out. And the data that you put up front, like the images and the words you put up front, will begin to determine those prejudices. So students can see that play out themselves on something that they build and how it begins to impact others, like when others are going to use that same program. So there are ways that you could do this safely with students so they can understand that this is a reality of when coding is developed and even the history of code that's got us to where we are now. And so we're hoping that you join us tomorrow in our workshop when we talk about the resources.
Yeah, I love that. And I can't wait for that session. This whole notion about ethical programming or learning, computer science in an ethical way, I think is a great message and something certainly to think about. I want to thank all of you for presenting today on this book, and I've read it. I have kids that have read it as well too. It's a graphic novel. It's awesome, and it's a powerful message. So thank you to all of you. Jean, Jane, Lily, and Shaina, thank you so much for being here with us today.